The law was on her side. The church was on her side. Even the Archbishop of Canterbury confirmed the money was owed to her. And still, the most powerful man in England would not pay. Mary Howard was widowed at 17, and at 19 understood that the king, who had made her a duchess, would cheat her of her inheritance. She was born around 1519, the daughter of Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. That placed her in the most powerful noble family in the land. The House of Howard supplied 2 cousins as queens, Anne Boleyn and Katherine Howard. Both ended on the scaffold. In this family, closeness to the crown was a promise and a danger. She did not grow up sheltered. Her father openly favored his mistress, and when Mary's mother resisted, he is said to have had her held down and the rings torn from her fingers. Mary grew up inside that war, between Kenninghall and Hunsdon. She learned early that women here were a means to an end, and remembered what happened to those who forgot it. As a young woman, she was a prize on the marriage market. Then her cousin's politics reached into her life. Anne Boleyn became the king's second wife, and the Howards rose with her. Henry had an illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset, his only living boy, and a possible heir. Such a son needed a marriage of rank. Mary was the choice. Who arranged the match remained disputed. Her father claimed the king himself had wanted it. Her mother said it was Anne Boleyn's plan to bind her family to the possible heir. Only the outcome is certain. In 1533, they married. Both were about 14 when they wed at Hampton Court on November 26, 1533. Because of their age and Fitzroy's poor health, the marriage was never consummated. They never lived under one roof. Mary stayed at court, serving her cousin, the Queen. Her only likeness comes from this time, an unfinished Holbein drawing that never became a painting. Then, in 1536, everything collapsed within a few weeks. In May, Anne Boleyn was executed for alleged high treason. In July, Fitzroy died, probably of consumption. Mary was 17. In a single summer, she lost her cousin, her husband, and every connection to the crown. What remained to her was a right. As a widow, she was owed a jointure, the share of her husband's estate that should support her for life. It was a considerable sum. Yet Henry VIII refused to pay. His pretext was simple. If the marriage was never consummated, perhaps it was no marriage at all. And without a valid marriage, no jointure. He handed it to his lawyers, who let it sit. Here we see who Mary was. She did not wait quietly. She wrote, she pressed, she fought. In one of her few surviving letters, she appealed to Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister. She even doubted her own father was fighting hard enough, and asked to come to London and stand before the king. She could not believe she was denied what no woman in the land had ever been denied. A remarkable naivety for someone who had just lost 2 cousins to invented charges. Her father was visibly annoyed by her persistence. He later wrote he had never thought her like this, almost too clever for a woman. It was meant as a rebuke. It was the greatest compliment of his life. Even Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, agreed with her. A marriage made at a lawful age, he declared, was a marriage before God. Church and law were of one mind. Only the king was not. For 3 years, she received nothing. She sold her jewels, ran up debts, wrote letter after letter, and the king met her with silence. Then, in 1539, the Howards returned to favor, and the matter suddenly moved. By 1540, Mary had her income, more than £700 a year. She had won, but not a single shilling of it came from Fitzroy's estate. The money came from monasteries Henry had just dissolved, from plundered church property. The king had looted half of England rather than admit this woman was in the right. Money was not the only place she showed a mind of her own. She contributed to the Devonshire manuscript, a book of verse passed secretly around. The court, collecting the lines of a man the king had imprisoned over Anne Boleyn. Raised in the old faith, she turned openly to reform, the daughter, of all people, of England's highest Catholic nobleman. Her brother, it is said, tried to keep her from reading, and she was not yet finished with this brother. In the waiting years, her father tried to marry her off again. The talk was of Thomas Seymour, the brother of a queen. Mary refused. A remarriage would have ended her fight for the jointure, and she was a duchess. Seymour only a knight. As a widow, she had a power she lacked as an unmarried girl, the power to say no. Then came a proposal that surpassed everything. Her own brother, the Earl of Surrey, is said to have urged her to become the aging king's mistress, her own father-in-law. Mary was horrified. She said she would sooner cut her own throat than consent to such villainy. It was Surrey who dragged the family to the brink. At the end of 1546, he and her father were arrested and taken to the Tower. The charge against Surrey: he had borne royal arms and reached for power. When the king's men searched Kenninghall, they found little of value. A duchess's caskets were empty, the jewels long since sold to pay debts. Mary, too, was questioned and gave testimony against her father and her brother. One could call that betrayal. But the picture is more layered. Here was a frightened woman with no man to protect her, 3 of her cousins already executed. She called her father a loyal subject and her brother reckless. Nothing she said proved decisive in the end. Others incriminated Surrey far more heavily. He was executed on the 19th of January, 1547. Her father was to follow, but Henry VIII died on 28th January, in the early hours of the day set for the execution. Norfolk stayed in the Tower, but he lived. What came after shows Mary had never abandoned her family. She took in her executed brother's children and had them educated by John Fox, of all people, whom her Catholic father would have despised. Edward VI granted her £100 a year for their upbringing. She tried in vain to free her father from the Tower. She never married again. Under the Catholic Queen Mary, stepdaughter of her cousin Anne, she kept her distance from court. Mary Howard was about 35 when her life ended, the year unclear to this day, 1555 or 1557. She was buried at Framlingham, beside the boy she had married at 14, never touched, and barely known. Their shared tomb was never finished. No likeness lies on the stone.